right, good afternoon. Oh, we can do better. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome back. This is our first Positive Links of the series, and it's very exciting to have such a terrific first speaker or speakers with us today. I'm Gretchen Spreitzer. I'm the Faculty Director of the Center for Positive Organizations, and we welcome you here. I understand there's quite a number of people coming to Positive Links for the first time. If that's you, would you raise your hand? Wonderful. Oh my gosh, this is great. Welcome. And for those of us that are old veterans, let's take some special care to make sure those folks are welcome. The Center for Positive Organizations, for those of you that may be new, we're all about the science of positive organizations, and we really work to do the research and understand the practice behind how to create high-performing organizations that also bring out the best in their people. And on that note, I want you to view a short video that we've created that I think gives a little bit more life to what the center is about. So if you can start that up, Sherry.
Moments of greatness are all around us. Do you see them? It's when you're at your best. It's when your team or organization is at its best. Here at the Center for Positive Organizations, we seek to understand this greatness, to help you and your organization be at your best more often. Greatness is seen in the high-performing, ethical, and generous leadership found at all levels of an organization. It can be found in your workplace relationships and a career filled with purpose, meaning, and compassion. It's seen in resilient teams who buck the status quo to make a culture change. It's in organizations that make a positive difference in the world. Hundreds of researchers from around the world study these phenomena in a field of science founded here at the University of Michigan. And to this day, we remain the movement's central catalytic hub. We share this knowledge in inspiring and practical ways through innovative learning programs, events, resources, and organizational partnerships. In our diverse co-learning community of scholars, educators, students, and leaders, we give opportunities for individuals and organizations to find and grow their greatness. Together, we are building a new breed of organization, the positive organization.
All right, so if you'd like any more information about our center, do check out our website, or even better, come across the street and visit us sometime. I would also like to recognize the sponsors of Positive Links. So in addition to Paul and Diane Jones, who have supported the Positive Links speaker series for many years, and by the way, they're not able to be here today, I'd also like to thank the Sanger Leadership Center, the Tauber Institute for Global Operations, and the Zell Lurie Institute for Entrepreneurial Studies. We appreciate their support in allowing us to put on great programming and also to be able to capture it so that those who aren't here can still view this in the future. And by the way, we also have many people live streaming this, and we welcome you today to do as well. So for those of you who have not been here before, I'd like to indicate that one special way that we welcome new people, as well as help make everybody more comfortable, is we take a few minutes at the beginning of every Positive Links to create a high-quality connection. And basically, you can figure out what that means for you. But what we'd like you to do is stand up, make eye contact with somebody that you don't know, walk over, shake their hand, say your name, and you have about 1 minute to make a high-quality connection. So, go. Wonderful. I always think it's great when I have a hard time getting your attention. Clearly, you've done a great job of creating a high-quality connection. All right, so with that, I'd like to introduce our two speakers today. So our moderator is Ariana Almas. She's a member of our Plus Lab, which is a year-long developmental experience, co-curricular experience out of our Center for Positive Organizations. She's also a second-year MBA student. And Ariana, she is all about impact. So when I asked her for some ideas about how to introduce her, she mentioned that from her very earliest days as an elementary school student, her job was to have an impact by being a comedian to make her friends and her co-students laugh. And that's only continued on today, whether it's, are you gonna make Scott laugh?
I already am.
From her 3 years at Year Up, which is an interesting organization helping young adults from historically underprivileged neighborhoods and communities get career experience at corporations, to her more recent experience with the Ross's Open Road program this summer, working with social entrepreneurs, to most recently her summer internship at Microsoft, working on inclusion and diversity programming there. Ariana is all about impact, and we're really glad that she has agreed to be our moderator today, asking questions of our speaker for today. By the way, these questions are not ones that we've just dreamed up, but these are the questions that you asked when you registered for the program for today. So these are a synopsis of your questions. So if you asked one, I think you're going to hear it this afternoon. So our special guest today is my friend and colleague and dean, Scott DeRue. Scott joined Ross just in 2007. It seems like you've been here for such a long time. And in that time, he's taken on so many different roles in the school, from director of the Sanger Center, where I was privileged to serve as co-director with him when it was still the Ross Leadership Initiative, to the dean for all of our executive education programming, now to being the entire Ross Dean. And Scott also is all about impact. He's about looking at how business schools can really make a positive difference in the world, and how we as business educators can help students go out and be a positive force through business and through nonprofits and so forth. And when I asked Scott, given that today's topic is how can positive workplaces solve the global challenges of our generation, I asked him, have you been part of a positive workplace before, or maybe a negative work environment before that might have shaped kind of how you think about this question? And I have to say that from the very first days that I got to know Scott, we were on the same hallway, and we'd often be in very early in the morning, maybe the only ones, and I'd see him walking down to the copy room, and I'd say, Scott, how are you doing? And what was your normal response?
Outstanding.
Outstanding, fabulous, fantastic. I mean, the words, the expletives? No.
Some days.
The enthusiasm, they were always positive. And at first I thought, is this guy for real? And as I got to know him, yes, indeed, he was for real. He was fabulous or outstanding. But when I asked him, was there an early developmental experience that you had as a job, he told me about his first job at age 14. His job was to unload semis of rolls of fabric weighing 55 to 70 pounds. A 14-year-old. And that was his job 5 days a week for 8 hours a day. And I said, wow, that was a really tough job. And he said, you know what, I loved it. And the reason he loved it is because he had a colleague who he was able to shoot the bull with, who treated him as an adult, he was really able to make a high-quality connection. And so I think that gives maybe a glimpse of how Scott thinks about positive workplaces. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Ariana, who will get us started with a first question for Scott. So thank you. Let's give them both a warm welcome.
So thank you so much, Gretchen, for the introduction. You know, when Gretchen emailed me asking for a couple of facts, I threw one out there, and I was a little nervous that it might come up and I'd have to make good on it. But I do a killer Batman impression. So if we have time, perhaps later, I will bring it out.
How do you tease like that and then say maybe later?
But in all seriousness, I am very honored to be here. One of the reasons I actually came to Ross was to answer the question if business can play a positive role in society. and the fact...
Your mic is not on.
All right.
We got Batman.
Little tape. All right. So again, I'm honored to be here. One of the questions I came to Michigan to answer is, can business be a positive force for good in society? And one of the reasons I chose to come to Michigan is because of the Center of Positive Organization. So I'm truly honored to be here. And but enough about me. We have our special guest here today, and you know, I tell some of the MBA ones, they're new to the program here, one of the first things you can do to make a good impression on your first day is just answer the definition questions. When your professor says, what's microecon? Get that hand up. So we're going to start it off with just a definition question. So Dean DeRue, can you just define for us, how is a positive workplace defined for you?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for coming today. It's a pleasure to see everybody in the crowd, and I'm sure there are lots of people online as well. So Ariana asked a complex question, which I will respond to with a very simple answer. So the question is how do we think about or define a positive workplace? And to me, the way I've always defined it, the way I've always thought about it is that's a workplace where people want, an emphasis on want, to come to work every day. There's a big difference between want and must. And there are lots of workplaces, lots of organizations where people are coming to work because they must come to work. But a positive workplace for me is people wanting to come to work. And there are many things that will define and compose that workplace. But if you can create a workplace where people get out of bed every morning excited and wanting to leave the house and come to work, the discretionary effort that you're going to get, you're going to get the most from them. And that, to me, is what a positive workplace is all about, is the difference between want and must.
So we're going to take that and we're going to go big for the second question. Which global challenges in particular are positive workplaces most able to impact? And what are the most significant barriers that keep us from addressing these challenges?
Yeah. So our generation has a number of challenges that we face globally, economic, social, political, et cetera. And business as an institution, I think, has to play, not can, but must play a significant role in addressing many of these economic, social, and political challenges that we face globally. The question here is, what's the role or the possible role of a positive workplace in addressing some of those challenges? And there are many different ways to think about those challenges. You can, for example, look at the United Nations and their 17 Sustainable Global Development Goals as one way to think about that. If you break those goals down, about a third of those address various sustainability environmental issues. There are a number of them that address macro social issues like poverty, for example, or food and hunger, access to food. And business as an institution, I think, has to play a role in addressing all of those. But in terms of the workplace, when I look at, for example, these 17 issues that have been identified by the United Nations, there are three that really illuminate themselves for me that positive workplaces, I think, can play a significant role. First is access and the opportunity to have decent work, right? Quote unquote, good jobs, right? So some of those sustainable global development goals have to do with jobs and economic prosperity. And I think positive workplaces play a significant role in creating access and opportunity to decent work, decent pay, and economic prosperity. By economic prosperity, in no way do I mean riches, right? But access to economic prosperity in a way that allows us to thrive as individuals in society. So that's one, decent work, decent pay. The second is we have, and there are people in this room who have done research on the impact of organizational life in the workplace on health and well-being, broadly defined, right? And we have many epidemics in our society, ranging from the obesity epidemic to one that I think is acute, which is just levels of stress in our life. And if you look at the research on health and well-being broadly defined, a lot of that can be traced back to my lived experience in organizations, right? The experience I have at work during the day, and there is very clear research that shows that experience I take home with me, and there's clear research that shows the experience I have at home comes back to the workplace. And so the second that I would highlight is health and well-being broadly defined. I think the workplace and positive workplaces can really play a significant role. And the third that I would highlight is one of equity. If you look at the United Nations goals, there are two that deal with equality. One is specifically gender equality, and the other is generically referred to as reducing inequality in the world. I'm using intentionally the term equity in this case, but I think positive workplaces, or the workplace generally, has a significant role to play in creating an equitable work environment for people. And if we're talking about anything other than ability and actual performance on the job, then equity does equate to equality, right? But the workplace for me has the opportunity to really move the needle significantly on those three issues: decent work, good jobs, decent pay, health and well-being, and equity in our lives.
Thank you. I worked in a nonprofit prior to my time at school here, and one of the challenges that we always have, and is a challenge anywhere, is just how do you measure the impact of this work? So I'll pose that to you. How do you measure the impact of positive workplaces on global challenges?
Yeah. We would not be a business school if we did not think about measurement. Measurement is difficult in many different ways. I'll answer a complex question again with what I think is a simple answer. There are input metrics and there are outcome metrics. If anybody's going to work for Amazon, they refer to this. Danny's here. You're going to work for Amazon. At Amazon, they will refer to this as Y metrics versus X metrics, with the Y being, in a regression sense, the outcome, and X being the variables that predict it, the inputs. When we think about the impact of the workplace on these global challenges that we face, if we only focus on the outcome, for example, reduction in poverty or access to good jobs and those sorts of things, if we only focus on those outcomes, to me, that's a fool's errand. Because there are systemic issues that are well beyond the workplace that affect those outcomes. I think you need to assess those outcomes and have an understanding of them, but if that's your only focus from a measurement perspective, I think you will be sorely disappointed over time. Because there are these systemic issues that are, like I said, beyond the workplace. But I think there are a number of interesting process or X metrics that one could pay attention to. For example, equity. So what does, for example, gender parity look like in pay? Right? Well, there are a number of things that I can assess on the front end of getting to equity. For example, access to job opportunities within the organization that we can pay attention to that would be nice process metrics for if we do these things well, then the outcome should occur. And I think in organizations, we often get over-focused on the output, and we don't pay as much attention as we should on the process metrics to get us there.
I mentioned earlier, part of the reasons that I came to Ross is because I wanted to be at a business school that was thinking about these topics. And I'm very fortunate and very happy to be here. In your opinion, what role can business schools play in addressing some of these global challenges as well?
So where do you think business falls in its, as an institution, in its respect in society? Is it above government? Is it below government? Is it above religion, below religion? I mean, it's interesting to think about where business as an institution falls. I think we can agree generally that there's a need for advocacy in understanding the impact of business as an institution and how it can make a positive difference. I fundamentally and very strongly believe that we as a business school have the opportunity to be a public advocate which also includes accountability, but a public advocate for the role of business as an institution in society and the positive difference that it can make. So for example, this past year, this summer, we stood up an initiative called Business Plus Impact. And we're still figuring out exactly what that's going to be and what that's going to mean. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is be a convening force for bringing all the important players together to a conversation about how business can actually make a positive difference in the world. That's what we're after. Creating business solutions in partnership with government, NGOs, etc., for these big global grand challenges of our generation, right? Be a convening force for that. That's what we're after. And I think we'll do a really good job of that over the next 3-5 years. Here, as a business school, at the end of the day, we really do two things. We generate ideas, and we develop people. Right? If you want to take a complex enterprise, business education, or higher education generally, and you want to simplify down what we actually do, we generate ideas through our research enterprise of the university that are intended to transform the world, how people think, how they act, how they connect with others, what we're able to do in terms of technology, whatever the case may be. Okay? And the second side of the album is we're here to develop people. Right? So if you accept that, then what's the role of the business school? The role of the business school is to build the research enterprise in a way that enables us as a community to develop ideas that are going to transform how individuals, how businesses, how communities think about the role of business and the role that it can play in terms of driving these positive outcomes and solving some of these big world challenges. So Business Plus Impact is in part intended to do that. The Center for Positive Organizations, over its history, has been a research engine, right, with a community of scholars across the globe that is intended to also generate those ideas. Okay? The second thing we do is develop people. So at the end of the day, what we're really after is developing people from the age of when they first get here at 17 years old, all the way up to 50s and 60s that we engage with in our executive programs and so on, and everybody in between. We're really after how do we develop people with the character and the capability, and those are two different things, but the character and the capability to use business as an instrument to make a positive difference in the world, to create those workplaces where people want to come to work and can do their best work to make a positive difference. Right? That's what we're after, ideas and people. And if we do both of those things, we can actually make a significant difference. In particular, when we're able to partner with, for example, companies around the world and ensure that our ideas find homes where they're beginning to use those ideas to transform how they function. So, for example, the Executive in Residence program here at the Center for Positive Organizations is a great way, a great example of companies, leaders coming into the organization to learn from us, but what's also happening when they come in? We're learning from them too, right? So, but that's a great way, right, for us to have an impact, sometimes local, sometimes global, right? But it's really down to ideas and people and how we generate those ideas and how we develop those people to go off and make a positive difference. The business school's got 50,000 alumni. The university has 575,000 alumni. That's how we have a difference. That's how we make a difference, is we're sending thousands of people into the world. The question is, do they have the character and the capability to use business as an instrument to make a positive difference?
I want to shift over to talking a little bit more about companies. We mentioned them in your response, but before I do that, I would love to stay focused on Ross. We have a question here. How have you incorporated elements of positive organizational scholarship in your own leadership here at Ross?
There are many examples, but I'll use a few that draw from actually people in this room. So one thing I learned from Kim Cameron, who's sitting to our left, is a concept called the gratitude journal. You've heard of the gratitude journal? Okay. Well, if you'd like to read mine, I'm happy to share it. Right? But more so than just the gratitude journal, every day I sit down and write a handwritten note to at least a person, right? To thank them for something, show an appreciation, show gratitude. Now, I didn't do that before I met Kim, right? Before I watched him teach executives around the world about the power of the gratitude journal, I didn't even know the research existed on this thing, right? But the research is actually pretty clear. It makes a difference, right? So that would be a very micro, local, personal example. But also when you think about what we're doing organizationally, the Business Plus Impact Initiative is an example of that, right? I wanted to give a school-level voice to the impact that business could have in society, in particular around some of these challenges that we're facing. If you look at, for example, what the undergraduate students are doing now in their integrative semester, where we ask them to not only work in the functions of business, finance, marketing, et cetera, but to work across those functions, what they're doing in their integrative semester now is using the education to solve some of these big world challenges. So we actually asked them to take on several of the challenges from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and come up with business solutions for those challenges, right? And so whether it's at that local level, the very personal level, all the way up to thinking about the impact that a positive organization or positive business could have in society, we're trying to layer that in at all of those levels. What we're doing at the school, but also, at the end of the day, we have to role model the behavior that we expect out of others. I mean, if we're not role modeling that, how can we ask other people to do that, right? And so hopefully that at least gives you a couple of examples.
Yeah, great. So let's shift over and talk a little bit about companies now. I saw you earlier. I was just preparing for a class that we affectionately call CEOs at the MBA level, where a group of students acts as a company in the middle of a crisis situation. And one of the lessons I took away in just preparing for that, my team was up today, so I've been on stage a lot, is that there are a lot of competing priorities out there. And there are a lot of critics, and there are a lot of voices. So what is the best way to help senior leaders at companies not only understand the benefits of positive workplaces, but prioritize building that positive culture?
So there are a number of questions embedded in that question. So one question is, how do we get senior leaders of firms to understand the importance of a positive culture to their organization? That's one question. Another question that's embedded in there is, as a senior leader, how do you manage competing priorities when those competing priorities don't allow you to make the choice that you would always want to make in terms of that positive culture, right? So I'll try and answer both of those. So I don't know a senior leader who would say culture is unimportant. They may be out there. Maybe I'm just not exposed to them, okay? If you ask them, does culture matter? The answer is probably yes. Do they walk that talk? Do they create organizational routines, practices, norms, beliefs, etc., that enable those positive cultures to come to life? Obviously, the answer is it's highly varied. Some do, some don't, and everything in between. So why do you think that is? I'm actually asking.
Oh. I don't know.
So why might that be, right? Now I have a premise, which is leaders generally will agree that culture matters. Now the research on culture is pretty clear. It does matter, right? Now there may be differences in where culture ranks in terms of what matters, but culture generally matters. I think most people don't actually understand what we mean when we say culture, number one. And I think even if you were to clearly articulate and define what we mean by culture, I think a lot of people have no idea how to manage it, how to build it, how to reinforce it, right? It's a little scary, right? It's ambiguous. If you can't sort of see it, I can't write it down. Right? I mean, some definitions, Kim, you can correct me on this, but a lot of definitions of culture are the things that you can't write down. Right? The beliefs, the norms, how things work around here, right? And so as senior leaders, getting our hands around, well, how do I create a culture that is positive, that's built on whatever values we want to articulate that are important to the organization? I think most people have no idea how to do that. And so why is it that we would see that variability? I think it's because we, maybe as business schools, we haven't done a great job over many, many years. I mean, this school was founded in 1924. I would imagine there was a period of time where we taught more about the functions of business than the importance of culture, right? That gets reinforced. For example, if you take our executive education business, the overwhelming majority of that business, corporations coming and engaging with us, is in the leadership management culture space. Why is that? Because I think a lot of companies are realizing that this is an area for improvement and an area for talent development. So I think one answer, certainly not the only answer, but one answer to your first question is why do we see that variability? Is because, one, we have a hard time defining it, and two, we don't yet have the capabilities universally to manage it. It's a little bit easier for me to figure out how to calculate certain financial transactions and things of that sort. The other question that was embedded in your response, so one was sort of how do we get senior leaders to see the importance of that? I think we can do a lot better in terms of training, development, and that sort of thing, and the ideas that we produce. So, competing priorities. This is one of the most difficult aspects of a senior leader's job, right? We have to get comfortable with the fact that you are not going to please everyone. We make decisions every day. Right? I've probably made at least 5 of them today where I know that I'm not going to please someone with that decision. Right? The question is the decision that you're making based on a clear set of values and principles? To me, that's the question. And are you willing to make those transparent? Right? So I think what we need to equip senior leaders with is the courage to define those values and principles and make them transparent. And then anytime we make decisions that involve competing priorities, which is almost always, can we trace our decision back to those values and those principles? And if the answer is yes, but I'm not happy with that decision, at least I understand it. Right? When I started this job, I told my team, you're not going to agree with every decision that I make. You're going to make decisions, because I don't want every decision having to come to me. I told my team, you're going to make decisions that I may not always agree with either. But the question is are we transparent on the values and principles by which we are making those choices? And if we are aligned on the values and principles by how we want to make decisions, then 9 times out of 10, we're going to be aligned on the decisions that we are making. Unfortunately, in organizations, many times we make decisions without being transparent on the values or principles that are driving those decisions. And I think a lot of times we're doing that because we don't know what values and principles are actually driving those decisions. And so as senior leaders or as future leaders, the ask that I would have of you is sit down and ask yourself, what are the values? What are the principles that you're going to use to make decisions? And then have the courage to be transparent about those. And it's an ongoing process. It's never as if you get it perfect, right? But be transparent with it, have the courage to define it and communicate it. Again, not everyone's going to agree, but at least they understand.
So let's get out of the C-suite a little bit. Let's talk about some other roles. One of my favorite classes that I took here at Ross actually came out of the center is social entrepreneurship. So the concept of making a positive difference in a company and a given infrastructure, no matter what role you have. And I left that class with a very firm belief that you don't have to have authority or title or position to be a leader. So what strategies would you suggest for implementing positive workplace practices when you're in a non-decision-making role within an organization?
First of all, was Chris White your instructor?
Yes.
Chris, wonderful job, because she came out of your class with the exact mindset that we want. So fabulous. That was positive embarrassment, another Center for Positive Organizations practice that I use as frequently as possible. So Ariana, let me push back actually on one element of the question you asked. I would propose that there is not a role that is a non-decision-making role. Think about it. No matter what role you play in an organization, you're making decisions. You're taking action. Every action you take is a decision. Every action you choose not to take is a decision. Right? Every role in an organization is a decision-making role. I fundamentally believe that one of the things that holds us back as individuals and as organizations is how we think of ourselves as leaders or non-leaders. So let me tell you a story. I'm starting my 2007, my first class that I'm ever teaching here. It's an MBA class. It starts at 7 p.m. I walk in. I don't know what Michigan time is. So I walk in, I'm expecting 60 students, and there are 10. So that took me a moment to figure out what Michigan time was. Then 60 students show up. First question out of my mouth, how many of you see yourselves as leaders? Ross MBA students, what percent of hands do you think were raised when I asked what percent of you all see yourselves as leaders? What do you think? 10? That's a very pessimistic view of 40? All of them. Okay, so basically every possible imaginable combination. It was about 50-50, 60-40. Okay? That was surprising to me. I walked in assuming that it would be most, like the overwhelming majority. Top business school, we attract great talent. So then I started asking, well, why is it that at least this one portion of the class would not see themselves as having agency, having the ability to act and make decisions? So I just asked the class, well, why is that, 40-50% of you all? What do you think the response was for the people who said, I don't see myself as a leader today? Precisely. So the answer was job title. So I came from a job where my title was not manager, leader, whatever, fill in the blank. Or I didn't manage anyone, right? I didn't have direct reports, those sorts of things. So all of the work that we have now done on identity and its connection to leadership started at that moment. Because why is it that half the people would say, I don't see myself this way? And it is squarely rooted in the assumption that is embedded in that question is, what about these non-decision-making roles? The most powerful thing we can do is some words we use. Gretchen did some of the original research on psychological empowerment. Okay. One of the most powerful things that we can do is empower people with the belief that they can be proactive, they are agentic, they can actually act, they can make decisions. Right? Now, coming back to my first half of that, we have to give them values and principles that are guideposts to making decisions. Right? But once we've clearly defined those, then are we empowering people to then make decisions consistent with those principles and values? That to me is one of the most powerful things that we can do. And so getting our students to come out of a class believing that they can be entrepreneurs, even if the organizational culture and structure and all of that stands in the way, as a business school, that's one of the most powerful things we can do.
Another topic that I think has been on the minds of many, there's a lot of negativity right now out in the media. DACA ending, tragic hurricanes. all over the U.S. And it brings up the question, how do you suggest that workplaces remain positive when we as individuals are often faced with overwhelming feelings of negativity coming from the media or whatever's happening out in their communities?
So one possible response to that question is, and I think this is generally true, and you've seen this with the recent hurricanes of Harvey and Irma. I had the fortune of being down in Texas a couple weeks ago right after Harvey, and to see the community come together, to see organizations come together in really powerful ways. There's something about the human spirit that when really bad things like that happen, that are completely indiscriminate in terms of who they affect, right? Rich, poor, black, white, it doesn't matter, right? The human spirit and the ability to come together in moments like that is really powerful. The question is as organizations and as leaders within organizations, are we able to enable our organization to come together in that way, right? And so oftentimes, what is bad and horrific and tragic can actually lead to the appearance of light and hope and optimism, and I think bring communities, whether it's a community in Ann Arbor, a community in Houston, Texas, or a community like Michigan Ross or at Microsoft, stronger together, right? I mean, just today, one of the, I think it was one of the large tech firms. No, it was Walmart, actually. It was Walmart. I saw it as soon as I was walking in here. Every donation that we, the public, give to the Red Cross, they're matching 2x. It's pretty powerful, right? That's going to have a positive impact on that workplace, I think. The fact that we opened up dorms when Harvey hit, did you notice what we did? So as the university, we had dorms that were empty because school hadn't started. School was only a week away. There's cost associated with it. Who cares? Right? We opened up the dormitories a week and a half early so that all of the students who were impacted by Harvey had a place to live. So come to the University of Michigan a week early so that you can be safe, right? That's a really powerful thing. I had a number of people come up to me and just thank us for what, in effect, is a pretty small gesture, but makes a really large impact. But then you have the other things out there, right? DACA would be an example. The tragic events that have happened in Charlottesville and other locations around the world, in fact, not just the United States. And as organizations and as leaders within organizations, and when I say leaders, I don't mean the people at the top, going back to our earlier conversation. I mean everyone, right? Leadership's a behavior. It's stepping up, being proactive. It's an action, right? We need everyone, when those moments happen, to stand up for the values that define our community, right? And so what values, what principles are going to define our community? And we need to stand behind those and bring our community together around those values. And it's not always easy, right? You're going to have people that are going to email you in the middle of the night or find your cell phone number and call you at 2 a.m. Yes? Right? And tell you that you shouldn't do that. And I'm using very nice language. Right? And you have to have the courage and the fortitude to say, no, these are our values. And as a community, we get the luxury, we get the opportunity, and we have the responsibility to define those values. Right? That's the most powerful thing we can do as an organization and as a workplace.
You brought up a lot of strong statements. It brings me to this question about what are some of the practices that are non-negotiable in your mind for establishing a positive workplace?
What's the one thing that every workplace has in common? People. right? People, at least for now. Right? At least for now. If you came to Dan Pink's talk last night, we'll see in the future. All right? Don't be scared. Okay? There will always be people in organizations. What practices are non-negotiable? We have people. So, do we create both culture and formal practices that address the challenges that we've talked about? Do we create alignment between the culture that we espouse, that we want, and the practices that we have on the ground? The non-negotiable for me is misalignment. Or some of the research that we've done, Sandra Cha and myself and some others have done, is what we call leader hypocrisy. The non-negotiable for me is saying that you stand for this over here and actually doing this over here. None of us are perfect. We're not going to get it right all of the time, right? But are you in pursuit of aligning what you say you stand for with what you're actually doing in terms of the practices that you're building on the ground? There are many, every organization may have different practices, right? And that's fine, right? We're going to have different values and different principles that are going to lead to those. We're going to have different cultures. So there's not a checkbox that says every organization should do X, Y, and Z practices, and that leads to success. What we know is that alignment between everything from strategy to values, culture, formal systems and practices, that alignment is critically important, right? And so the non-negotiable for me is the alignment between the culture we espouse, the beliefs, the norms, the values, and the practices that we embrace as organizations. If that alignment's not there, you're never going to achieve the results that you want to see.
So you've uttered a lot of my favorite words: culture, values, beliefs, impact. However, this is not favorite words for everyone. And we have a question here I think is really interesting. How do you approach positive conversations with teammates, managers, what have you, without sounding soft or like a pushover? That's word for word what we have here.
So how do you approach positive conversations? Which is interesting. So the antithesis to that is a negative conversation. But how do you approach conversations in ways where you don't come across as a pushover? That's the question.
That's the question.
We're human beings. We interact every day. What do human beings want? Respect, compassion, empathy. I mean, Dan Pink at last night's talk used the word empathy. I lost count at 15. Right? The courage that it takes to be compassionate, to show empathy, to give respect, is a much greater level of courage than to not do those things. Right? I've never met someone where they were compassionate, empathetic, respectful, where I looked at them and said, what a pushover. Right? Now, we have to have standards for excellence. We have to have a commitment to excellence and the performance that we expect. Right? But we can have a high standard and an expectation for the performance that we expect and embrace compassion, respect, and empathy. In fact, I would argue that if you embrace respect, compassion, and empathy, you're more likely to get the performance that you aspire to. And in fact, the research that's come out of this center and others around the world demonstrates that. And so if you want to call me a pushover because I'm doing the things that lead to higher organizational performance, then call me a pushover any day.
Awesome. All right. Let's see. One of the things I think a lot of us here in the audience say, we're going to be recruiting, we're going to be looking for environments and for companies in which we could promote this work. How can one evaluate different companies before joining their workforce to gauge its ability and openness to starting or supporting programs that solve global challenges or that bring positivity into the workplace?
It's a great question. When I first started my research career, the topic that got me really interested in academic research was called, or is called, person-organization fit. And the subjective perception that people have of whether they fit with an organization. And what we discovered in that research, and there's many people around the world that have studied this and discovered this as well, is that a major component of that fit perception is my belief that my values are congruent or fit with the values of the organization. And so there's a lot of research that shows how individuals on both sides of the hiring table, the candidate and the employer or the interviewer, assess their perceptions of this fit. And what we generally know is that in the interview setting, those perceptions, let's just say, are not always accurate. So the best piece of advice that I would have for you is go work there and understand that your first job, your first organization will most likely not be your last. And it's okay. I mean, if you look at our great-grandparents, most of them worked for one company, one type of job, family, etc. Our freshmen that started the University of Michigan a couple of weeks ago will have more careers than their grandparents had jobs. Right? And so my best piece of advice for you is to go and work there, and the people make the place. Right? I mean, Ben Schneider wrote an article in 1984 that I will never forget, and the title of it was "The People Make the Place." And in the recruiting process, you're trying to put your best performance forward, and the organization is trying to put its best performance forward. They choose who you get to interact with, right? And you choose who they get to interact with, right? Go work there, have the lived experience, meet the people, work with the people, engage with them, and then judge. Do my values align with this organization? And if they don't, have the courage to move on. It's okay.
Well, I've been given the cue that we have time for just one more question. So I'm going to skip down here. Dean DeRue, if you had to put your bets on one particular initiative for us to address a global challenge, what would it be and why?
So I have to pick one of the three that I articulated earlier is what you're asking me. So if you recall, the three that I talked about, decent work, decent pay, economic prosperity, number one. Two, health, well-being, broadly defined. And third, one of equity. Let me talk about equity first. We'll talk about just gender equity. There are many different forms of equity in organizations. We'll talk about gender equity first. At the current rate, we'll just talk about pay for a moment. At the current rate, which we are closing the gap between gender disparity in pay, I will approximately be 80 years old when we reach parity. Okay. If you're an African American or Hispanic woman, I will be approximately 270 years old. Technology better speed up pretty quickly, right, in reaching gender parity in that regard. Certainly there's work to be done there. And so I would place my bets that, one, it's becoming widely accepted that it's an issue. I think organizations are working tirelessly to develop the talent pipelines that will enable us to address that issue in an accelerated manner. I get excited about that. And it's not just gender, it's all forms of diversity in that regard. I also get really excited about the health and wellness, again, broadly defined, because I think it actually saddens me how the levels of burnout, the levels of stress that people feel and experience in organizations, and then they bring that home. And I think we underestimate the negative impact that that has on the family structure and the downstream consequences that has for the children in that family structure. And that creates a systemic effect that I don't even think we fully understand today. And so can I have two?
That's fine.
It would be those two. If we can really move the needle on the equity issues and really move the needle on the health and well-being issues broadly defined, I think we probably move the needle on the decent work, decent pay issues as well. And there are companies that are making really positive strides there. Whole Foods, Costco, the average hourly rate of those firms is now around $21 an hour. It's pretty good. Starbucks making a deal with Arizona State University where basically every barista and employee can have access to education. That's a really bold move. So I think there are firms that are really trying to create decent work, decent pay, and really put their money where their mouth is in terms of generating access to economic prosperity. So those other two, I think we have more work to do on.
Well, thank you to both of you. This was such a wonderful conversation. Do I need this? You both are in many ways the best that Michigan has to offer, and you make me proud to be part of this institution. And I hope that this inspires all of us to think about how we can, in each of our roles as leaders, can move toward addressing these global challenges, especially through the world of work. And we have an artifact for both of you. It's a positive spiral. This is the artifact we give to all of our speakers, and I think you really are creating that positive momentum in making a positive difference in the world. And last but not least, I want to invite you all to come next month for our speaker, Teresa Glum. Look what her topic is. Let's make work better. Teresa is a distinguished professor at the University of Minnesota, and she has an amazing TED Talk that she's going to be building on and sharing her research with us on October 3rd. So please come back, and let's give one more warm thank you to Scott and Ariana. Have a good evening. Thank you for coming.